Welcome! Tonight's story comes from a harsh and sun-scorched wilderness, a place of dust, fatigue, and waiting. But even in that dry place, a lesson flows like water, a reminder that even in your deepest frustration, even when it feels like nothing is moving forward, God is still faithful. This is the story of God providing water in the desert, found in Numbers 20. It's a story about a people worn thin, a leader stretched to his limit, and a miracle that flowed from a rock. So find your breath now. Let the tension of your day fall away. And come with me into the wilderness, where even in silence and scarcity, God still shows up. The people of Israel had been wandering for decades. The promise of a new land still lingered on the horizon, but the road had been long, winding, and hard. Food had fallen from the sky. Enemies had been defeated. But frustration clung to them like dust on their feet. They camped now at Kadesh in the desert of Zin. The sun beat down mercilessly. The days passed slowly. And the weariness ran deeper than the sand. It was there, in that barren place, that a grief came upon the people. Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, the woman who had sung by the Red Sea, who had walked beside them from the beginning, died. And they buried her. There were no songs now. Only silence. And dry ground. The people grieved. But with Miriam gone, and their future still unclear, fear began to fester again in their hearts. And then, as the days stretched on, the water ran out. It always started the same way. When scarcity came, so did the complaints. Voices once quiet with grief now rose in accusation. "There is no water," they cried. But it wasn't just a statement of fact, it was a charge against Moses and against God. "If only we had died when our brothers fell before the Lord," they shouted. "Why did you bring the Lord's assembly into this wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here?" It was an old tune, one Moses had heard before. One he had grown weary of. They pointed fingers, not just at the desert, but at the men who led them. "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? There is no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates. And now, not even water to drink." Moses listened. Aaron stood beside him. And both men knew, this was not just about thirst. It was about trust. The people had forgotten the manna. Forgotten the parting of the sea. Forgotten the pillar of cloud and fire that led them day by day. In this moment, their memory had dried up faster than the springs of Kadesh. Moses and Aaron did not respond with anger. Not yet. They didn't argue. They didn't defend. Instead, they turned, as they always had, to the tent of meeting. The sacred space where the presence of God would meet them. And as they entered, they fell face down on the ground. Not just in sorrow, but in surrender. They had no clever answers. No easy solutions. Only desperation and reverence. And there, in the stillness, the glory of the Lord appeared. The same glory that had led them out of Egypt. The same glory that had burned atop Sinai. The same presence that had walked with them through every wilderness mile. As Moses and Aaron lay on their faces before the presence of the Lord, the answer came. Not in thunder. Not in rebuke. But in calm, clear instruction. "Take the staff," God said to Moses. "Gather the assembly together. You and your brother Aaron are to speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." "Speak to the rock," he said. "Not strike. Not shout. Speak." And water would flow. It was a moment of trust. A test of obedience. The miracle would not come through strength this time, but through surrender. Through words, not force. Through faith, not fury. "You will bring water out of the rock for the community," God said, "so they and their livestock can drink." And the instructions ended there. Simple. Straightforward. Full of grace. Moses took the staff, the same staff that had parted seas and turned rivers to blood. The people were waiting. Their voices buzzed with complaint. And though the Lord had spoken peace, something inside Moses stirred darkly. He was tired. He was grieving. And he was angry. For decades, he had led them, interceded for them, watched them complain, rebel, and turn their backs on God. He had stood in the breach when they built golden calves, begged for mercy when they deserved judgment. And here they were, again, still doubting, still complaining, still blind to all they had been given. Moses' hands clenched tighter around the staff. He looked at Aaron. Then he looked at the people. And all the grief and frustration of years came boiling to the surface. Moses stood before the rock. The crowd pressed in. And his voice, instead of calm, came out sharp. "Listen, you rebels," he shouted. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" There was no softness now. No surrender. Only tired anger. And then, instead of speaking, Moses raised his arm and struck the rock. Once. Twice. The staff cracked loudly against the stone. And in a moment of mercy, water still gushed out. Streams burst forth, rushing and clear. The people surged forward, cups raised, hands lifted. Livestock drank freely. The miracle had happened. But something was wrong. God had been clear. Speak to the rock. Instead, Moses had struck it. And not just struck, but done so in frustration, in pride, and in front of all the people. The water flowed. But the obedience had fractured. The water flowed. The people drank. The livestock were satisfied. The crowd that had once shouted in anger now stood in awe of the miracle. But heaven was not silent. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." The words landed with finality. They did not thunder. They did not shake the ground. But they carried a weight deeper than any blow. Moses had led the people for 40 years. He had faced Pharaoh. He had stood on the mountain and received the commandments. He had shepherded a stubborn nation through storms and scarcity. And now, at the edge of the land promised so long ago, he would not enter. It wasn't just about the rock, or the staff, or the tone of voice. It was about trust. God had told Moses what to do, speak, and water would flow. It was to be a moment of quiet wonder, a display of divine provision through obedience. But Moses had acted from frustration. He took the miracle into his own hands. And in doing so, he made it about him. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" he had said. As though the power was his. As though the act was his to control. And so, in front of the entire community, the sacred had been handled carelessly. God still provided. Because he is merciful. Because the people still needed water. But Moses, the leader chosen by God, had misrepresented him in front of them all. Aaron stood beside Moses throughout the event. He had not spoken in anger. He had not struck the rock. But he had also not stopped his brother. And now, he too would bear the consequence. He, too, would not enter the promised land. Together, they had stood before Pharaoh. Together, they had faced the wilderness. Together, they had interceded for the people. And together now, they would stand at the edge of the land and not go in. There's no record of Moses arguing here. No fiery plea. No attempt to twist God's words. He had once begged for the people's lives after the golden calf. He had once stood in the breach when they rejected the land the first time. But here, he was silent. Maybe he knew. Maybe deep down, he had felt it, that in his anger, something sacred had been broken. And so he bowed. Not physically, perhaps, but in heart, in spirit, in the weight of knowing. God had always been faithful. And even this consequence, was not wrath. It was a boundary, a lesson, and a protection. Because leadership, too, is sacred. The wilderness journey did not stop. Even after the water flowed. Even after the sentence was spoken. The people moved again, setting out from Kadesh toward Mount Hor. And as they walked, something quiet hung in the air. An awareness. A weight. Aaron's time was coming to an end. The Lord spoke to Moses. Aaron will be gathered to his people. He will not enter the land I give the Israelites, because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Moses didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply listened and obeyed. God gave specific instructions. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar, he said, and bring them up Mount Hor. And there, remove Aaron's garments and put them on Eleazar. Aaron will be gathered to his people, and he will die there. The three of them ascended the mountain together. Moses, Aaron, and Eleazar. The old leader. The high priest. And the son who would carry the mantle forward. There's no record of crowds watching. No trumpet blast. Only the wind. The sky above. The dust of a lifetime's journey under their feet. When they reached the summit, Moses did as God commanded. He helped Aaron remove the sacred priestly garments, the robe, the ephod, the breastplate, the turban. Each piece folded carefully. Each movement full of reverence. And then, piece by piece, he dressed Eleazar in his father's place. It was not just a changing of clothes. It was a changing of seasons. A passing of responsibility. A holy transition. And when the final garment was placed, Aaron died there. In peace. On the mountain. In the presence of his brother and his son. Moses and Eleazar descended from the mountain alone. And when the people saw that Aaron was no longer with them, they understood. The high priest was gone. And the people wept. For 30 days, they mourned him. Not just for the man he had been, but for the story he carried. The one who had stood before Pharaoh. Who had spoken to the people when Moses' voice trembled. Who had entered the holy place on behalf of the nation. Gone. And with him, a chapter of their wilderness journey. The camp packed up once more. The dust of mourning still clung to the people. But the journey did not end. They were still not home. And so, with Eleazar now serving as high priest, and Moses still leading the way, the people walked on. The wilderness still stretched wide. The path was still uncertain. But something had shifted. Not just in leadership, but in awareness. God had shown them, again, that even when they failed, even when tempers flared and trust faltered, he remained. Present. Faithful. Unchanging. At the waters of Meribah, the people learned the limits of their trust. Moses, even in his strength and history, learned the cost of disobedience. And Aaron, a man once hesitant to speak, later robed in holy garments, laid down his life in quietness. It is easy to forget that miracles often come with lessons. That provision does not erase the need for reverence. That success in public can still carry private grief. God had given them water. But he had also drawn a line. He had said, "Trust me fully." Even in emotion. Even in pressure. Even in the heat of leadership and wilderness and fatigue. There is something comforting about how the story ends, not with a final battle or sweeping triumph, but with a walk forward. No dramatic reversal. No grand moment of glory. Just the steady return to the road. The quiet continuation of a long, long journey. And in that stillness is the reminder, God's work is not always loud. Sometimes, it is found in the unshakable consistency of his presence. in the mercy that flows even when our obedience falters, in the love that leads us forward, even when we have to leave things, or people, behind. So now, as we close this story, take a breath with me. Let the dust of the desert settle in your imagination. Let the sound of running water remind you, even when things feel dry, even when the people around you are restless, even when you make mistakes of your own, God still shows up. He doesn't abandon you. He doesn't withhold care. He gives, patiently, faithfully, again and again. Like the people at Meribah, you may walk forward with questions, with regrets, with lessons freshly written on your soul. But you do not walk alone. The same presence that met Moses in the tent, that sent water from the rock, that received Aaron on the mountain, walks with you still. So rest now. Let go of the pressure. And breathe. The journey continues, but for tonight, may you feel the peace of knowing that even in your desert places, provision flows. And even when your steps are slow, God remains near. Sleep in that truth. And rise tomorrow with hope.